The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
On today's Farm Connections, the focus is on preserving our agricultural resources. First, we visit Farmamerica, Minnesota's Agricultural Interpretive Center, to understand how the knowledge of farming is passed on to another generation. Then I visit with members of the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center to learn how they're working to maintain a clean, safe water supply. And we'll meet our next FFA Student Leader of the Week, all right now on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office, is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
As the world continues to change, more pressure is put on farmers to deliver a safe, abundant food supply. But as a society, they're moving away from the farm, and fewer people have any real connection to our agricultural roots. How do we maintain awareness of the realities of farming? That's the mission of Farmamerica in Waseca, Minnesota, to preserve and celebrate our agricultural heritage and to pass it on to other generations. Let's take a visit to one of Minnesota's treasures, Farmamerica.
Farmamerica is a place and it's a dream, it's a vision to tell the story of agriculture from settlement times to the present and into the future.
Agriculture is really important in this country and important to all people. And if we're going to feed people, we need to know about agriculture and how it's developed and how it's carried forward. And so that's the reason for Farmamerica.
The distance between the farm and food on the dinner plate seems to be growing. And so that gap is growing every year. And it's so important that people recognize there is a connection between the land that they drive over or pass and the food that's on their dinner plate, that we really want to make sure that these kids are asking the right questions in the future.
It used to be that everybody came from a farm or a rural area and they knew what was going on out in the country, but we've gotten away from that, so a lot of people don't know what that is anymore, and it's not through fault of their own, it's just that we've grown away from the rural areas, and so they don't know where their food comes from and how it's produced and even what it is that's growing out there when they drive by in their vehicles.
We have people that make policies for agriculture, and it's tough to make good policies if you don't understand where your food comes from in the first place. And so that's the primary reason why we make sure we have school tours, we have camps, we have festivals, we have events to tell the story of agriculture, past, present, and future.
Farmamerica began in 1978 when the Minnesota State Legislature named this location as the Minnesota Agricultural Interpretive Center. This fell on the heels of the biennial celebration of this country's existence in 1976. And the powers that be said we really ought to have some continuing reminder of our roots and what really were the economic underpinnings of Minnesota's society. So at the Forest History Center at Grand Rapids and the Agricultural Interpretive Center here were the two designated by the state for that continuing purpose as a public-private partnership. Farmamerica tells the story of agriculture in a variety of ways. Well, lots of programming is attached to fulfilling that mission. The school tours program that we have for 3rd through 6th graders attracts people from the Twin Cities and about a 100-mile radius from here. The visitor center that we have really attracts a number of agribusiness meetings and that kind of thing. This 160 years or so that's represented here really is an important story of Upper Midwest agriculture and rural life. As we move to the mile-long Time Lane Road, we enter the prairie, and it's more like the settlers, first settlers, would have experienced back in the early to mid 1800s. People really located their farms, their places to live, near water sources. You'll find on our prairie that we do have a water source and wetlands and other things. We also have an area that we call Peddler's Grove, where folks that were native to this area prior to settlement actually came and did their trading and so forth. We have a one-room schoolhouse here and a church that was moved here from near New Ulm. For us, that's about 60 miles. And that congregation supports that church even today in terms of remembering what it meant to their families in rural Lafayette, Minnesota. We do have a blacksmith shop and a feed mill. And we, of course, grow corn and soybeans here. And we have our 1930s farmstead. In the Depression era, grew out of something that was pretty fabulous in agriculture and rural life in the whole country. But the Depression took the wind out of those sails. And so understanding being out in the country without electricity and having livestock that needed to be milked and fed and this kind of thing, and not being able to turn on the TV set at will. Those are kinds of things that a lot of kids, adults too, can hardly fathom. And that's what we have interpreters for, all volunteers, to tell that story, not just by looking at a building or looking at a place, but living it through the studied experiences of people that are willing to tell that story.
A day like today where we have this agricultural camp, all the commodity groups and other people and volunteers that are working to put that on. That's what makes Farmamerica go. I see that, I'm just thrilled to see them here and be so excited about having a chance to ride in a tractor, having a picture taken with a tractor, and learning what agriculture is really all about. They get the idea that it just doesn't come from the grocery store, that there are farmers out on the land that are growing those crops and those animals, and that it's really exciting to see that happen. And it really gives you hope that the future of agriculture is good and people will understand it.
Farmamerica serves thousands of people each year through tours, demonstrations, classes, and festivals. Let's take a closer look at a new institution, Farm Camp.
Farm Camp Minnesota is a camp for children in grades 3 through 6, and it's to promote modern agriculture and teach the children where their food is produced and how it is produced, and to just give them a perspective of what's out in their environment, so when they go out and see things like corn and soybeans growing in the field, they know what those things are.
Good morning, campers.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right.
Today we have 6 different rotations for the campers to go to. One is the corn rotation, where they learn about corn, how it's grown, they learn about the plant, what it's used for.
So this is sweet corn. To make these things, they don't use a plant like this.
And then they have a soybean rotation, where they teach them what the plant is about, where it's grown, what it's used for. We have swine here today. We have turkeys, dairy and beef. Those are our animals that we have, just to show them again, what they're eating and also what products come from them, because there's a lot of different products that come out of those.
What other products do we get from cows besides meat?
And then last but not least, we have our tractor rotation today, where everybody is getting a ride on a tractor, and that seems to be a big hit. They really enjoy that.
Anybody want to know how much horsepower the tractors have?
They're just smiling, and it seems like they just love it. I'm not even sure which one goes over the best as far as rotation is concerned, because they've just been excited about it. I think that it's something that they really are getting into.
You got a question, Taylor?
The teaching is being done by farmers. We have some of the pork ambassadors here today, and the dairy princesses are here for the dairy part, and there's a beef farmer here talking about beef. And then we have, in the tractor part, we have our ag implement dealer, so we have agribusinesses involved also.
Come on up, Joe. So we can call this a cab, but I call it the command center. Okay, be careful on the way down.
It's just out of a love and a passion for what we have and what we do that we're doing this. I think it's important for them to know where their food comes from so that they have a better understanding of it, what they're eating, and not only the nutritional value, but what has to be done in order to produce that, so that there aren't misunderstandings and misconceptions about what happens in agriculture, because we care very much for what we do. That's how we make our living. We care for our animals very much. We try to give them the best care that we can. And same with our crops. We as farmers eat what we grow, and so we don't want to produce anything that we wouldn't want to eat for the consumers out there. So it's very important that they know that we eat also what we produce, and so we care about what we do.
Whether or not we live on a farm, clean water is a vital resource to all of us. But as the population increases, the demands on our watershed also increase. I visited with Warren Formal and Tim Raditz of the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center to understand how the issue is being studied and applied to farming. Let's listen in. Tim, tell us about Discovery Farms.
Well, Discovery Farms is a farmer-led water quality research and educational program. We collect water quality data on real operating farms throughout the state of Minnesota. We have 10 or 11 farms that will be up and running this fall, and these farms range from southeastern Minnesota up to the Red River Valley. We have a real diverse set of farms between cropping systems and livestock, and real diverse landscapes too. Minnesota is a pretty amazing state for its change in landscape. So I feel we have a good set of farms, and we'll be collecting some real interesting data in the coming years.
Warren, how do you fit into the Discovery Farms, and what's the name of your organization?
Sure. Well, I'm with the Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center, and it's a long name to describe a coalition of 18 Minnesota farm groups that work together to help farmers throughout the state address water quality issues in general. And our group was formed in 2008, and really through the leadership of Minnesota farmers. Again, it's kind of like the Discovery Farms model, where farmers are leading the way. In 2008, the Minnesota corn growers, Minnesota soybean growers, and Minnesota Farm Bureau put their heads together and then their resources to create the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center. And once that was established, then we reached out to the rest of Minnesota farm groups, and we ultimately have grown to 18 Minnesota farm groups as our coalition now.
Warren, why is it important to have this organization exist?
Well, Minnesota is a place where we've got a very dynamic agricultural economy, we've got very progressive producers, and we've got a lot of water quality issues. We've got a lot of lakes, a lot of rivers. People in Minnesota have a rich cultural tradition of recreating and fishing and swimming and using water resources, and so it's something that people take very seriously. And so there are a lot of questions about agriculture and how farming practices affect those water bodies.
So what do you do to answer those questions?
Well, that's really why we came together. And what we first attempt to do is identify where the issues are and what they are. Is it a concern about sediment, or is it about nutrients in a river or a stream? And as we began to do that, we realized the key to addressing those issues was data. Farmers are very data driven, and they make decisions really cautiously by looking at data. And so if we're going to help farmers lead the search for solutions, we've got to provide them with actual water quality data.
Is that where Tim's organization comes in?
Absolutely.
Well, Tim, how do you do that? How do you help Warren accomplish what he's trying to do?
Oh, sure. We go out to farms and set up some monitoring equipment that samples the water that is leaving farm fields. We try to find areas around 20 to 40 acres in size to sample from. And we sample water that is leaving the soil surface, surface runoff, and we also set up and sample tile water runoff or subsurface drainage. And what we do with our monitoring stations, we can tell how much water is leaving and then also sample that water and send it into the lab and tell how much sediment is in the water and how many nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus is in the water as well. And so the goal for our program is to provide data to farmers that is useful and relevant to their operations. We want to provide data that enables them to keep on this path of continual improvement, where we're gaining more knowledge and we're improving our farming practices, something that has happened for many years. But we also want to use the data to educate the general public on modern farming practices and how they interact with water resources of the state.
Well, earlier you mentioned 10 to 20 acres field size, correct?
Yes.
Why is that more valuable than, say, a smaller plot?
Sure. Well, traditionally, water quality research was done on a plot scale, like at a university research farm, or at the end of a big watershed, say where the Root River dumps into the Mississippi River. While on that plot scale, that might be a little too small to tell what's going on a farmer's field that is out there operating today. On a big watershed scale, that might be a little too big to determine, take that data and scale it down and determine what's happening on these fields. So we're kind of staying right in the middle. We think the field scale data that we're collecting is most relevant to producers right now currently.
As you speak, I've kind of got a visual of the mouth of a river and the things that might be in that river. I would think it'd be very difficult at that point to decide where it came from.
Right. Yes, there's a lot of factors when you get to that pour point or where it goes into the river. We like to say there is no zero. Every land use, every person has an effect on water quality within a big watershed. So when you're looking at just data at the end of a pipe or end of a watershed, it's hard to take that data and go back up into the land in the watershed within, or the land within that watershed and say, well, here's what the losses from this field were, here's what the losses were from the city, here's what the losses were from this piece of grass. So what we're doing is collecting data on a field scale for agriculture and to try to help nail down some of the numbers so we can have more of an idea of what some of our contributions are.
Warren, let's say you and I are canoeing down the river where another tributary comes in, and we see something that doesn't look just right to us. What kinds of industries or issues contribute to what's in that water?
Well, essentially everything that's happening in that watershed or in that landscape is going to contribute. And it starts right with the natural geology of the watershed. Rivers, first and foremost, are impacted by the geology through which they flow. So you've got major differences, and if you think in Minnesota about rivers like the Upper Mississippi and the headwaters area through north central Minnesota, an area that doesn't really have much topsoil, a lot of granite outcrops, and so it's characterized by relatively clear, deep lakes and rivers. Here in southern and western Minnesota, where we've got soil, hence strong agriculture, as those rivers flow through those regions, they pick up some of that soil, whether it's in a farm landscape or not, and it affects the water. And so you start with the geology, then you move on to an understanding of the land uses, including agriculture and urban and roads and all of those things. Everything we do potentially can affect those waters. And so the key for us is to figure out, given that we need to produce food here, how are we going to do it in the least impactful way? And we believe that if all users of the land, whether it's highway engineers in how they design roads, or whether it's city planners in how they lay out a city, or farmers in how they manage their farms, if we each look objectively and critically at what we're doing and minimize our impacts, collectively that will help us improve our waters.
Very interesting. I think I've heard you talk about stream bed erosion or
Sure.
large pieces
Sure.
of the shore line sloughing off into
Sure.
the river.
Yeah, there are several processes that can contribute to in-stream or near-stream sediment or turbidity issues in our rivers and streams. And as little as 8 to 10 years ago, it was believed that most of the soil or sediment that was being carried by rivers like the Minnesota was coming from farm fields. And farmers looked at what was happening on their fields, and there weren't a lot of visible erosion places where they could see visual signs of erosion on their fields. And so farmers began to look into different research, ways to explore where the sediment was actually coming from. And today, PCA's research, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, acknowledges that in some watersheds, as much as 80 to 85% of that sediment is actually coming from those stream bank sloughing episodes and events where the river is actually either undercutting a bank, or it can simply be the weakness of the soil and it just falls into the river, and it can be caused by several factors. And it's very complicated and very complex, but it's something that up until about a decade ago or so was not really being studied.
So let's go to one of your research farms, your discovery farms.
Yeah.
What would we see out there?
We would see a big metal box and a structure in the middle of a field. A lot of times when people drive by these things, they wonder, what the heck is that out there in the field? But what it is a bunch of sophisticated instruments. We tend to install some what we call a flume. It's essentially a big funnel where we want all the water to go through, so we can accurately measure how much water came through and have a point where we can sample that water from. So there'll be kind of a funnel, what we like to call, at the edge of a field, and a box with a bunch of complicated instruments in it. And people, if they're interested in what's going on in some of these studies and some of these research farms that we tend to have a lot of field days. So keep your ears open. If you hear something about a Discovery Farms field day, we'd love to have you come out and take a look and see how these monitoring stations work and operate.
Warren, this takes a lot of resources in terms of money and financing. Where does that come from?
Well, it really does. It takes not just people and time, but it does have to be funded. And this program, it really is led by Minnesota farmers through their farm organizations, and principally the Minnesota Corn and Soybean Checkoff programs. The checkoff programs are the farmers' way of contributing to promotion of their products and also to research. And in Minnesota, every time a farmer sells corn, 1 penny per bushel goes into a checkoff fund. And similar programs happen across other sectors in the grains and livestock production. And so the groups have pooled that money and are the primary supporters for MAWRC and also for the Discovery Farms program. And really it's a solid demonstration of their commitment to be involved in the identification of problems and the search for solutions.
Wonderful information from both of you. Thank you so much. As I'm thinking about what you just said, Warren, couldn't that information be used for policymakers, leaders in government that would say, this is how you're going to do it?
Well, absolutely. And there are those who think that we should regulate or dictate a certain way to farm. I think that our research shows that simply wouldn't work for a whole host of reasons. You've got the vast differences across the landscape that require farmers to do different things. And what we want farmers and others to understand, and farmers largely get this, is that what is appropriate in one region of the state may not be the best practice for another region. So we want regulators to understand that as well. And we also know that over time these things change. And so we wouldn't want to see any sort of a regulatory regime that stifled creativity, whether it's on behalf of technology, GPS, the things that help us gather more information on the farm, whether it's technology and seeds, the equipment manufacturers, or the farmers themselves and how they do things.
Wonderful information. Keep up the good work, guys. We have a lot counting on agriculture. We all love to eat. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Warren, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Now let's meet someone carrying the torch of agriculture into the future. Our next FFA Student Leader of the Week.
I'm Vince Carl, serving as the Region 7 President this year. We cover about from northwest of GFW, so Winthrop, southeast, down to Owatonna. I am going to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities this fall for agricultural education. but I want to take a more of an urban aspect to it because I have come from the cities. I grew up in Richfield. I want to teach in an urban school so that I can show my students what agriculture is about, what opportunities it shows for them, and see what they really do with it. It's important for urban students to understand where their food comes from, what goes into it, and what they can do with agriculture. I came in as a city kid and I was able to find my place within FFA. There are so many different aspects to it that you can find your own niche, and basically anybody can find something in agriculture and in FFA that they love.
Whether or not you live on a farm, there is no denying agriculture's critical importance to all of society. Our hope is you'll never forget our common ag heritage and you'll always look for opportunities to make farm connections. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.